A Guten Erev Shabbos. Once upon a time, a woman came to the Sanzer Rebbe and told him her story of suffering. Sanzer Rebbe gave her some advice. He told her she should have faith in God, and God would surely help her. The woman declined to accept the advice and declined to be consoled. She said, "Rabbi, that is not what it says in the Siddur. In the Siddur, it says that God helped the Jewish people and then they had faith in God. First, he has to help, and then the faith comes afterwards." Sanzer Rebbe smiled and said, You are right. God must adhere to what it says in the Siddur. And he gave her a bracha, blessing, for a speedy end to her troubles. So here is a thought question for you to spend some time with between now and Pesach. Why is it that Moshe Rabbeinu, the name of Moses, our teacher, is not mentioned in the Haggadah? There's a million answers that are given. Some say the Haggadah is really about God taking us out of Egypt, not Moshe. Some say Moshe's name is not mentioned out of humility. Others give the answer that the final step in the Seder, which is called Nirtza, is the same gematria as Moshe. So many different answers are suggested. Could be that the missing Moshe in our Haggadah parallels another missing Moshe in the Torah. Moshe's name appears in every weekly portion from when he's born until the very end of the Torah, except for one parsha, Parshas Tetzaveh. The son of the famous Rav Kook, the also famous Rav Tzvi Yehuda Kook, says this is not on account of any lacking on the part of Moshe, but rather because of his pervasiveness, because of Moshe's magnitude in the Torah of Israel. Rav Kook Jr. writes, as cited by Rav Shlomo Aviner, the name of Moshe, God's emissary to redeem the people, does not occur in the Haggadah because of his centrality in the role of redemption. His centrality in the Exodus story is universal and all-encompassing. Okay, so really this is a trick question because Moshe is, in fact, mentioned in the Haggadah once, one time. And it's a verse, it's a pasuk. It's from this week's Parsha, Beshallach. Unless you're using the Haggadah of the Rambam, Maimonides' text of the Haggadah, or the one of the Gaonim from Babylon, who actually do omit this verse. Rambam's son says that he put it in, he said it. But he didn't print it in his book. The one time Moshe's name does appear, it's a proof text. It's not part of the narration, and Moshe is actually the object of the verse, not its subject. It's a familiar verse because we say it in davening in the morning every single day of the year. We say Israel saw the great hand that God wielded against Egypt, and the people were in awe of Hashem, and they believed in God and in Moshe his servant. Vayar Yisrael asayad hagdola asher asa Hashem b'Mitzrayim v'ya'aminu b'Hashem uveMoshe avdo. Your Art Scroll Chumash gives a nice angle, nice insight from the Orach Chaim HaKadosh that we've discussed from time to time. He says, Vayiru ha'ames Hashem, that the people had yira. Well, often we render yira as fear, as in yira shamayim, fear of heaven. Art Scroll makes the point on this verse that it's more than fear, it's higher than that. The nation revered Hashem. We were in awe. We achieved such a higher level of connection that it was considerably beyond simple fear, like fear of punishment. This was respect, awareness, recognition, reverence that God is exalted. That's a worthwhile thing all on its own. Then it speaks about our view of both God and Moshe as a result of the splitting of the sea. The Ibn Ezra says, although the nation had believed in Hashem from the start of Moshe's mission in Egypt, our belief was now strengthened, and we say to the extent to which Moshe spoke in God's name. Then they add a vort from the Moshe of our age, Moshe Feinstein, who said that we recognized a new dimension in God's greatness, that the same miracle that saved us proved to be the end of the Egyptians. The splitting of the sea saved us and ended their pursuit of us, along with ending their lives. This was something new, a chidush, even over all the 10 plagues, which on their own surely showed us that God is master of all. The Me'am Lois quotes Midrash Rabbah to say sort of a scary thing. It says, up till now, the Egyptians drowned in the sea. Up until the Egyptians drowned in the sea, the Jews were skeptical. Can you believe it? We had witnessed 10 plagues in Egypt, from the Egyptians' river and water sources turning to blood, but not ours, up to and including the slaying of the Egyptian firstborn, which did not harm us, and we still had our doubts. So the Midrash says, up to this point, we were still a little suspicious. Maybe Moshe did all these plagues through some kind of manipulation of forces. I mean, couldn't it be? So if you thought conspiracy theories and fake news were modern inventions, you'll be interested in seeing this Midrash. If you thought the Jews are by habit skeptical of our leaders and even of God sometimes, here you have it. We still didn't believe. Even as we're leaving Egypt on the way out, we still have our doubts. Until this moment, when we saw Pharaoh and the Egyptians drown in the sea that had just allowed us to cross through in safety. That is when the whole Bnei Yisrael cleansed our hearts of any doubt or suspicion and prepared ourselves to sing the Shira Sayam, the song at the sea. That moment was the instant in which we truly became free. That's when we saw our former oppressors destroyed. Our psychological subjugation to Egypt ended, along with the physical captivity that ended 7 days before, which also gives you some good insight into how the mental effects of trauma last a long time past the end of physical trauma. By the way, the same author says that this is all practical instruction for us today. We should cleanse our hearts of doubt and cynicism each morning when we say this verse of B'ya'aminu b'Hashem u'v'Moshe Avdo, and put ourselves in the right frame of mind to say the Shira, to sing the song of thanksgiving from the sea. There's also a pretty interesting insight into why the great hand of God that was made in Egypt is what caused the Jewish people finally to believe in God and in his servant Moshe. So what's this great hand? What's this Yad Hagedola? The story is this. Remember back to the beginning of the book of Exodus, Shemais, when Pharaoh decreed drowning for all the Jewish newborn boys. They'd be drowned in the Nile River. Remember how Pharaoh's daughter went down to the river to bathe? And it says that she sent Amasa, which could mean her maidservant, and it also could mean she stretched her hand out. Like this, she stretched her hand, to retrieve this floating basket with a baby in it. Rashi says she stretched her hand, signals to you that God miraculously allowed her hand to stretch far out to grab the baby in the basket. That's the great hand that God created in Egypt. When the Jewish people learned about this miracle, which it had taken place 80 years before, at that moment everything clicked. The asimon dropped for them, if you remember that phrase. All the pieces fit together for us, and we figured it all out. That was the moment where we began to have complete faith in God and in his servant Moshe, according to the Lev Aryeh. Back to Rashi on the verse, he says that finally at the sea, the Jewish people realized that this was God's plan and not simply Moshe's idea. We had a skeptical thought that if God wanted to take us out, he would have simply done it without all this drama, all the multimedia of 10 plagues. We thought it was some strategic process that Moshe dreamed up, and the proof was that the plagues didn't work, at least not the first 9 anyway. Finally, when the Mitzrayim lost all power over us at the sea, did we realize that Moshe was truly God's servant and spokesperson? And yet others say that the whole idea of now we believed in God and Moshe as servant pertains not to the Bnei Yisrael. It's talking about the Erev Rav, the mixed multitude of ethnic Egyptians who went with us out of Egypt and eventually became part of the Jewish nation. They were not descended from Avram Avinu and from Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, so they didn't have the tradition that we would be slaves, then we would be taken out and made free, as God originally told Avraham. This is before the internet, so they couldn't Google it. So this was their big aha moment. Now they knew it was up. Rabbi Eliezer Berkowitz comments that the word v'ya'aminu, to believe, doesn't simply mean that they had faith or that they believed that Moshe was for real or even God was for real. That was there in place already. He says it's a deeper level. Before this moment, the people were not sure whether or not Moshe had truly been sent by God. Now they knew for sure. At the same time, we also believed in God. We knew already that He was the Almighty Creator of heaven and earth, the whole universe, but we weren't sure whether He was really directly and intimately connected with the Bnei Yisrael, with the people of Israel, and with our misery, with our plight. And that's what changed in this moment. From this point on, we knew that God was leading us, and we knew that it was through Moshe's agency. 100 years before, Rabbi Berkowitz, the Sfas Emes, noted that the grammar of the Ya'aminu is causative. It's the Hifil form for you Hebrew grammar fans. It means the Bnei Yisrael not only believed, they caused others to believe. At the moment of the splitting of the sea, Israel's belief in God brought all humankind into the category of being able to recognize God's sovereignty over the world. Even we brought the concept, this was the time when we introduced the concept of faith. As a result of such idealism, we were blessed and able to sing this beautiful song. Rav Elchanan Wasserman of Baranovich says the question of faith is not a simple yes or no, is it or isn't it? There are many levels and sub-levels of belief. It might seem to us that perceiving God's presence through or using the physical senses of sight and hearing and all that represents the highest level of recognition. But in reality, sometimes our senses deceive us. They play tricks on us. The purest type of belief is loftier than what's awakened by experiencing a miracle or some other form of revelation. This is because it's generally not possible to achieve such an exalted level of faith when the soul is still housed in the body. If the Torah, the ultimate truth, he writes, uses the word believed, v'ya'aminu, it can only be speaking about the purest, ultimate degree of faith, which is usually close to unattainable. It's a very sublime and extraordinary level of faith in God. Rabbi Soloveitchik wrote that Pesach is commemorating God's encounter not so much with the individual Jew as with the entire nation as a collective. It was the entirety of the Jewish people who were involved. No one individual was singled out. No person, however great and mighty, stood above the others. No leader, no matter how inspiring and impressive, was treated differently than the rest of the community. Therefore, it's fitting that the name of Moshe does not appear in the Haggadah except once, tangentially, as a proof text, and in the Rambam's Haggadah, not at all. The Rav writes, on that mysterious night of revelation, God, enveloped in glory and majesty, appeared to the whole community. Everyone, genius and simpleton, king and servant, rich and poor, saw God. A famous and widely quoted Midrash, Rabbah, says that Moshe, hu goel Rishon, Moshe, hu goel Acharon, Moshe was the first one to redeem the Bnei Yisrael, so Moshe will be the ultimate and final redeemer also. So the story sort of comes full circle. When we fill the cup of Elijah, the kos shel Eliyahu, at the end of the Seder, and we're waiting for him to enter the house and sip from the cup, what are we waiting for? We're waiting for Elijah, Eliyahu, to announce the messianic redemption. According to Midrash Rabbah, the Messiah will be Moshe. So, from barely being mentioned in the Haggadah at all, he will be the man of the hour. There's a little detail to be worked out because the Messiah has to be a descendant of King David from Shevet Yehuda, and Moshe was from Shevet Levi. Not to worry, says Reb Chaim Vital, the Messiah will have Moshe's soul. Fine, we'll take it. Rabbi Pesach Kron tells a strange story in his Haggadah, which is called Seder with the Maggid. It's a lot of good stories if you like that. It's a parable, a mashal from the Dubno Maggid. Listen to the story and let's talk about how it lands with you. He explains that Moshe was surely God's agent and spokesman, as we've discussed. Moshe surely took us out of Egypt through Sinai, the River Jordan, and yet none of his leadership is mentioned in the Haggadah, except for this one tangential mention of Moshe that we've been talking about. It's because our only Redeemer is God, and yet the one mention of Moshe's name teaches us something important also. Moshe's role as the leader of our people is only important if we keep the tradition that he passed on to us. As great a leader as he was, it's his job as the servant of God that makes him important to us. Moshe, the leader, was born, lived to 120 to the day, and then died. But Moshe, the servant of God, has to live on in every one of us. So the Dubno Maggid's parable is this. There was once an outstanding Torah scholar who interviewed to be the rabbi of a town in the old country. The Kehillah was very impressed with him, obviously. He was a Talmid Chacham, a great scholar, he was a good speaker, and he was a mensch. They were eager to hire him, but he wasn't so excited. The head of the search committee sensed this, and he said to the candidate, Rabbi, before you make your final decision, you should take into account a very important fact. Remember that great Gedolei Yisrael are buried here in our cemetery in our town. That got the young rabbi thinking, okay, life is however long it is, but finding my eternal resting place amongst great sages of Israel, that's something to consider. So he went out to the Feld, this young rabbi, and he saw the graves of shoemakers, tailors, wood choppers, and butchers. No great rabbis that he recognized anyway. He was a little bit taken aback, and he came back to the head of the search committee and he said, are you trying to trick me? There's no great Gedolei Yisrael here. There's no famous rabbis. And the man said, with respect, there are. The rabbi said, name me 2 famous rabbis who are buried in this town. So the guy says, Rashi, for one, and the Rambam are buried here. And the rabbi lost it. He said, what do you take me for, a complete fool? Everybody knows Rambam is buried in Israel, in Tiberia, in Tiberias, and Rashi is buried in France. Who are you trying to fool? The president said this. He said, if you go to the yeshiva in Tiberia, if you go to France, you'll see the yeshiva students are studying every word of Rashi and the Rambam. These Gedolim are alive and well there, and everywhere else where Jews are learning Torah. Here in our town, we have no yeshiva, and hardly anyone ever opens a Gemara. Here, Rashi and the Rambam and the Rif and the Rosh, Rabbi Akiva and Resh Lakish, Rabbi Yishmael, Rabbi Huda Nasi, they're dead and buried, Rabbi, because nobody here learns them. Nobody even mentions their names. Please, Rabbi, stay here and learn Rashi with us. Learn the Rambam with us, and Shmaya and Naftalian and Hillel and Shammai and all the other Gedolei Yisrael, so that we can lift up our heads and say proudly that the words of Yehuda ibn Tabai and Shimon ben Shetach are alive and well, and they're living in our town, not buried, dead and buried like some ancient history. That's the story. So in that sense of the story, Moshe really is in the Haggadah, everywhere. Because it's telling us, when we read the Haggadah, Moshe is alive and well, if we keep telling the story, if we follow in God's pathways, and if we look forward to better times. And it's really all up to us. The late Novominsker Rebbe brings the whole thing right up to our moment in history like this. He says, remember that this is the moment in the story, the song at the sea, where the Jewish people burst out in song. What's so deserving about this moment that it calls for song? Says Rabbi Perlo, as long as there's wickedness in the world, which is standing tall in the face of Malchus Hashem, in the face of sovereignty of God, it's hard to sing. Only when you see the downfall of the wicked, the downfall of the Rishayim, when you see it with your own eyes, does it awaken a new awe of God, so much so that song emanates from the depths of our soul. As we await evil to perish before our very eyes, we look forward to the Az Yashir Moshe Uvnei Yisrael As Ashira Azois, literally, as it says, then Moshe and the entire Jewish people will sing this song. May we very, very soon burst into a joyous song of gratitude and appreciation and awe. Good Shabbos.